Let me tell you something right now that's going to shake the sleep out of your eyes. You better lean in, sit straight, and hear this loud and clear, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about power. It's about destiny, discipline, and the kind of fire no storm can put out. We're talking about a force that ain't just built with bombs and bullets. It's built with backbone, brilliance, and a belief system stronger than steel. We're talking about India's military, and let me tell you, the world ain't ready for what this nation's warriors are cooking up. Now, don't misunderstand me when folks hear the word terrifying. They think fear, they think danger, they think destruction. But what they don't understand is that sometimes what's terrifying ain't just what breaks things. It's what's so strong, so organized, so calculated, it makes you think twice before you even breathe in its direction. That's India's military, a sleeping giant for decades, but baby, it ain't asleep no more. It's wide awake, armored up, and walking with purpose like it owns the street. Because let's be real, it kinda does. You see, a lot of people didn't pay attention. They thought India was just IT support, call centers, cricket and curry. That's cute. That's real cute. While the world was busy laughing at stereotypes, India was busy stockpiling excellence. While they mocked, India mobilized. While they played politics, India played chess. And not the casual kind either. I'm talking grandmaster level strategy. Generations of wisdom, discipline, and resilience, all forged into a modern-day beast of a military. Let's start with the backbone of this machine, the soldiers. These men and women ain't just trained, they're sculpted. They're built from grit, molded in tradition and laser, focused with that Desi discipline that don't crack under pressure. You think boot camp in America is tough? Go walk through the Hell Week routines of Indian special forces like Marcos, Garud Commandos, or the Para-SF. These ain't just soldiers, these are ghosts in the jungle, shadows in the desert, precision in the chaos. These people will run 40 kilometers with a 20 kg load on their back, and still have the strength to shoot a mosquito in the dark with night vision. I ain't exaggerating, baby. That's real talk. But that's just the ground level. Let's elevate for a second. Literally, you seen what India's got in the skies. The Indian Air Force is a symphony of thunder and precision. Those suck. Hoi 30 MKI. They ain't just fighter jets. They're flying fortresses, dancing at supersonic speeds, dropping payloads with the kind of grace that'd make a ballet dancer cry. And then there's the Rafales. Phew. France gave 'em the blueprints. India gave him purpose. These birds ain't just flying. They're patrolling borders like eagles raised on vengeance. And don't get me started on space. You thought India was just throwing satellites in the sky. No. They're mapping precision strikes, tracking enemy movements, and building one of the most sophisticated defense grids in low Earth orbit. The same country that launched 100+ satellites in one go is now weaponizing intelligence like a master conductor in a war symphony. You blink and they already saw you. You breathe and they already mapped the oxygen levels. That's terrifying, not because it's evil, but because it's so efficient. Now let's dig deep, nuclear deep. You best believe India's packing, and it ain't no accident. See, some nations flaunt their nukes like muscle cars. Loud, flashy, and insecure. Not India. India's got the bomb like a grown man's got a loaded safe in his home. He ain't tryna use it, but try breaking in, and he'll show you what calm fury looks like. Agni missiles, Prithvi systems, submarine-based deterrence. It ain't just a threat, it's a doctrine. No first use doesn't mean no use. It means calculated, considered, and when necessary, cataclysmic. And if you think that's all, sit down, cause India's military ain't just a collection of weapons. It's an ecosystem, DRDO, that's their R&D backbone. These folks are inventing things that make science fiction blush. Hypersonic weapons in development, laser systems already tested, AI-powered drone swarms, they're not dreaming it. They're deploying it. India's not just preparing for war, it's preparing for a future where wars are won before a bullet's even fired. That's next level, but let's take a pause right there, because while all of this might sound like intimidation, the real terrifying thing ain't the hardware, it's the hardware. Let me explain. India's warriors ain't just fighters. They're patriots. They ain't just following orders. They're following legacy. These are people whose ancestors fought with swords and shields when the world had muskets, who stood up to empires with nothing but honor, who bled on borders not for money, not for medals, but for motherland. And baby, when you got soldiers like that, you ain't got a military, you got a movement, you got soul in uniform, and that's the kind of power no enemy can decode. And it ain't just about defense anymore. India's projecting power. Peacekeeping missions, they're there. Humanitarian operations, front line. Counter-terror ops across borders. Silent, swift, and successful. They ain't just defending lines on a map. They're defining what sovereignty looks like in the 21st century. Now I know some of y'all might still be asking, but why is it terrifying? Because the world has always been afraid of balance. When one side holds too much power, they sleep well. But when a new player walks into the room, one with brains, bravery, and backup, it shakes the table. India ain't playing catch-up no more. They're in the lead car, steering with one hand and texting Beijing with the other. Catch me if you can. This power didn't come overnight. It came from scars, from battles like Kargil, where high altitudes tested every breath and every bullet, from insurgency zones where the enemy looked like a neighbor and every shadow was a threat, from decades of underestimation where the world said, "They'll never make it." And India whispered back, "Watch me." It came from the sweat of engineers, the sleepless nights of scientists, the steel nerves of generals, and the quiet courage of every soldier's mother who kissed her son goodbye with tears in her eyes and fire in her soul. It came from a mindset shift, from reactive to proactive, from wait and see to prepare and lead, from playing defense to owning the narrative. This is what real power looks like. It's clean, it's calculated, and it don't need validation. And let me tell you something the world don't want to admit. India's military ain't just preparing for defense, it's preparing to shape peace. Not the kind of peace where everyone's scared of each other, but the kind where people know that justice will show up in uniform if evil crosses a line. That's terrifying to those who thrive on chaos, because when good gets strong, evil gets nervous, and India's goodness, oh, it just got muscle. But let's take a step back. Because this ain't just a love letter to India's military, it's a reminder to every person out there who's ever been doubted, overlooked, underestimated, or mocked. The rise of India's military is the rise of belief, of self-respect, of discipline, of saying, we don't need to be loud to be legendary. So if you're watching this and you feel something stirring inside you, that's purpose, that's pride, that's potential waking up. Because this ain't just a story about India. It's a story about what happens when a nation dares to dream beyond its circumstances. When it says, we may be scarred, but we are not scared. You want to know what's terrifying about India's military? It ain't just the missiles, the jets, the tanks, or the commandos. It's the spirit. It's the one. 4 billion hearts beating behind every uniform. It's the unity and diversity. It's the idea that a civilization that gave the world peace is now armed with power. And here's the kicker. The world's just now realizing it. They laughed, then they ignored, now they fear. Because you can't suppress what's divine. And India's military rise, that ain't just strategy. That's destiny unfolding. So next time someone tries to tell you India ain't a superpower, don't argue. Just smile, nod, and say, keep watching. Because the most terrifying thing about India's military isn't what you see. It's what you ain't even seen yet. And baby, That's what you need to know. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine, backed by innovation. For decades, India's strategic posture was predominantly defensive. It was shaped by post-colonial caution, by the trauma of partition, by the need to stabilize internally before projecting strength externally. The wait and respond model of military engagement worked during the early years of independence. It helped a young republic avoid overextension. It offered space to grow, to industrialize, to unify its diverse population. But the world changed, and India changed with it. And what emerged from this evolution was not just a stronger army, navy, or air force. It was a new way of thinking, a doctrine no longer rooted in patience alone, but in preparedness, precision, and preemption. A doctrine born from necessity, refined through pain, and now powered by innovation. The transformation began when India realized that the enemies it faced were no longer always visible across borders. They were invisible, embedded, and often asymmetrical. Terrorism didn't come with an army, it came with a backpack. Proxy wars didn't roll tanks across deserts. They planted ID in markets and trained infiltrators in the shadows. And when the cost of waiting became blood spilled on home soil, something inside the Indian strategic psyche snapped. The idea of deterrence by punishment started replacing deterrence by denial. India began crafting a doctrine not to react, but to anticipate, not to absorb blows, but to neutralize threats before they reached the gate. This doctrinal shift was tested and forged through key moments. The surgical strikes in 2016 across the line of control weren't just operations, they were declarations. They said to the world, India is no longer willing to absorb pain without response. These strikes weren't reckless, they were calibrated. They involved real-time intelligence, high-risk insertion teams, and the coordination of multiple branches. It was a message to both adversaries and allies alike. India had acquired the confidence, the capability, and the clarity to act decisively when provoked. Then came the Balakot airstrikes in 2019. Crossing the border, striking deep into enemy territory, and doing so without triggering a full-blown war. This was military theater, strategic signaling, and technological demonstration all in one. But more than anything, it was doctrinal evolution in motion. The use of precision-guided munitions, Mirage 2000 jets, satellite-based coordination, and an overwhelming information control strategy showed that India was no longer playing by the old rules. The world watched in disbelief. Not just because of what was done, but how it was done, swift, surgical, sovereign, but assertiveness alone doesn't sustain a doctrine. It needs fuel, and that fuel was innovation. This wasn't just about buying new weapons. It was about creating a new military, industrial complex. India doubled down on indigenous production. The Defense Research and Development Organization DRDO began accelerating timelines. Startups were brought into the ecosystem. Young minds were given a seat at the table. What emerged was a hybrid model of defense, traditional armed forces backed by high-tech innovators. Drones no longer just flew, they thought. Surveillance systems no longer just watched, they predicted. Ballistic missile systems no longer just threatened, they assured retaliation with pinpoint accuracy. Unmanned aerial vehicles equipped with AI began to patrol borders. Anti-satellite weapons demonstrated the ability to knock out space assets. Robotic surveillance dogs, hypersonic glide vehicles, and laser-based weapon systems weren't fantasies. They were in prototype testing. India's doctrine shifted from manpower, heavy to tech-smart. The soldier on the ground wasn't just strong anymore. He was connected, informed, and empowered. Command centers became digital nerve hubs. War rooms looked more like control centers of space missions than old-school bunkers. The doctrine evolved from deployment to domination, of data, of airspace, of electromagnetic frequencies. At the core of this doctrine was not just hardware but intent. The idea was simple: India will never provoke, but it will never again be provoked without consequence. It will not seek war, but it will end one if brought to its door. That posture of quiet strength, backed by real-time operational readiness, was revolutionary in a region as volatile as South Asia. Border infrastructure was modernized. Airbases were expanded near key strategic zones. High-altitude logistics were reimagined. What used to take days to mobilize now took hours. The days of delayed response were over. The days of decisive action had arrived. Even in the maritime sphere, the doctrine found expression. The Indian Navy's shift to a blue water strategy wasn't accidental. It was doctrinal. Control of the Indian Ocean wasn't just about trade routes. It was about projecting power and protecting interests beyond borders. India began conducting more joint exercises with the Quad nations. Naval warships didn't just sail. They signaled, carrier battle groups were restructured, nuclear submarines were quietly deployed. Sea-based deterrence was now not just a concept but a capability. The doctrine had extended to depth, literally. Air defense also underwent a revolution. The acquisition of S-400 systems from Russia wasn't just about missiles. It was about integrating multi-layered defense. India was telling the world, we're not just building walls, we're building shields. And while others debated policies, India embedded sensors and interceptors. Every border sector became a node in a national defense grid. Radars talked to satellites, satellites talked to jets, jets talked to ground forces. It wasn't just defense, it was symbiosis. This doctrine didn't emerge in isolation. It was influenced by global shift. China's aggression in the Indo-Pacific, Pakistan's persistent proxy tactics, and the rising prominence of gray zone warfare. But what made India's doctrine unique was its ability to absorb tradition and modernity. On one hand, the wisdom of Kautilya's Arthashastra, use of diplomacy, economy, and military in balance. On the other, the readiness to incorporate quantum computing into encryption strategies. It was ancient mindset, modern execution. Information warfare became another pillar of the doctrine. In a world where perception is half the battle, India's new military thought embraced media, narrative, and strategic communication. After every operation, it wasn't just about battlefield wins. It was about narrative wins. The global stage was a second front, and India learned how to speak the language of power, poise, and preparedness. Even the human element of the doctrine transformed. Training paradigms were upgraded. Special forces selection became even more rigorous. Simulators replaced mock drills. Psychological endurance became as important as physical. Officers were trained not just to fight, but to lead in an age of ambiguity. They were prepared not just to command troops, but to command drones, satellites, and AI-driven intel systems. The doctrine began influencing how India positioned itself geopolitically. Strategic partnerships with France, Israel, Russia, and the U.S. became more transactional and tactical. Military diplomacy emerged as a tool. Defense exercises, logistics pacts, intelligence, sharing agreements. India wasn't aligning blindly. It was collaborating selectively. Every handshake had a strategic reason. Every joint exercise a doctrinal underpinning. But perhaps the most revolutionary element of India's assertive military doctrine was its moral foundation. It wasn't built to conquer. It was built to prevent conflict through readiness. It didn't aim to dominate. It aimed to deter. This doctrine understood that peace without power is a fantasy, that in today's world, soft power walks taller when hard power stands behind it. So India invested in both. Culture and carriers, philosophy and firepower, and behind it all was a shift in mindset, from minimum necessary to optimum readiness, from reaction to anticipation, from hope for peace to prepare for war to preserve peace. It wasn't warmongering. It was war-proofing, because India had learned the hard way that diplomacy without defense is dialogue without teeth. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. It was born not in aggression, but in evolution. And every threat it faced became a teacher, every setback a stepping stone, every silence a setup for resurgence.